Hello and welcome to the Business Octopus, where we talk about all things sales, marketing, and technology. I am Avon Collis, CRM and Marketing Automation Specialist at Relevate and all-around good guy. And today I am joined with David Dean-Spread from Metitude, how to talk about how to deal with difficult people. Welcome, David. How are you?
I'm good, Avon. Thanks very much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. So David helps business owners and leaders resolve difficult people issues rapidly. Wouldn't it be nice if we could solve them all really, really quickly and just get it over with and get on with things? And, you know, one of the next most important thing is being deeply aligned within the leadership team or the leadership cohort. So, David, how does someone know if they have a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. They have a problem if they're noticing people being absent, people withholding effort, in other words, not doing as much as they could or not wanting to do extra work, people leaving the business, good people leaving the business, a whole range of issues there, people working in silos, people not helping one another, just saying, no, that's not in my job description, those sorts of comments, and people avoiding one another. And one of the hardest things to face, Avon, is the people who, the leaders themselves who are difficult. And very often their people won't tell them the truth.
Yeah.
And they won't know that they're being difficult. They don't mean to be difficult. I've never found anyone, generally speaking, who comes to work to say, today I'm going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult people don't mean to be difficult. There's always a reason. And it's really having the time, the expertise and the techniques for being able to discover those reasons and work rapidly on them.
Yeah. So obviously there's been lots of people that have had difficult client or difficult employees or difficult team members. Like I'm sure that there's times when, you know, someone's just having an off day or someone is just, you know, just not good at something. And so they're frustrated, so they don't perform at it. What's the sort of the fine line that sort of says, all right, well, they're in that territory of they're actually starting to become a problem?
So this really, it's down to the immediate, excuse me, the immediate supervisor, the extent to which they're actually engaged and aware of how their team members are going. And the moment you see something not working or something that's been delivered below standard or a withholding of effort, the first thing that the leader does, that supervisor does, is to really have a conversation, like a heads up conversation. But let's say it was you and I was your supervisor, and I noticed that this is the second time this week you've told me you're going to deliver something and you didn't do it. I'd then say, hey mate, let's have a meeting. I need to understand something. I might need to be giving you some more help, but you know, this is twice now you've told me you're going to do something and it hasn't happened. Can you help me understand what's behind that? Is there something that I've done? Is there something that you need help on?
I think that sort of says a lot. And I know that there's a statement or a phrase, sort of a standard you walk past is a standard you accept. And so the next, I guess, component of that is you've sort of highlighted that sometimes it's not always the employee. Maybe that there's other priorities. There's another problem out there. Maybe they've just prioritized the wrong thing, and there's maybe not a meeting of the minds. Is that accurate assessment?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It's a really good point. And it's almost, if we want to look at a military perspective, you've got to do the reconnaissance. You can't just go in and jump in where angels fear to tread. You've got to sit down and have a discovery conversation with that person to find out, you know, what are the circumstances around it without rushing to judgment.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes a very hard one. And I know that as a business owner or like of a smaller business, they're quite personally invested in all of those things. So sometimes that supervisor is the direct owner of the business. Is that Is that a challenge that's common?
Yeah, it is, and it's compounded by the fact that if that person's actually, the person who's providing the problem, if that person also happens to be in a key position, the owner or the supervisor is quite reluctant to make the situation worse.
I think that's sort of like, if you're just not approachable, then people go, don't tell them. And then it gets worse and festers, and then it explodes into something bigger later on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they have to act. And then, of course, it's a big drama. And
Yeah.
in the meantime, though, there's a lot of, there's productivity and performance issues come to hand. The supervisor's going to be stressed just over that. Yeah. And over not doing something they know they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not knowing how.
So why does a business need to address it?
Because of the cost to the business of difficult people. It causes, if you've got that kind of culture in the business where difficult people are being tolerated, maybe because they actually might be high value people as well, but at the same time difficult, there's a whole bunch of other people who are going to be impacted by that, and their productivity goes down.
Yeah.
And if there are people who are being difficult in the business, and their behavior is difficult, their manners difficult, guess what? That's how the clients are going to be treated too.
You hear a lot of these, I guess, personality matching things like Myers-Briggs, Kersey, or DISC profile. Do they help with any of that at all?
Look, that's a really great question. And yes, the short answer is yes. I tend to shy away from the personality ones. I prefer to go to those reputable profiling tools that actually talk about things that you can see. So Myers-Briggs will talk about personality, but you can't see personality. What we actually see is behavior and communication styles.
Yeah, but there's also a personal interpretation of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do profile my clients, but at 5 levels: behavior, communication, motivation, EQ, and emotional intelligence, and also their acumen or their values thinking, which is called axiology. And that's a deep profile. And the more crucial the person is to the business, the more we go into having that aspect measured.
Yeah. So what about obviously with the, profiling different people and understanding them? Like, how much weight would you give to something like that?
If I was going to split up the track record, and the current behavior is the most important bit, the profile will either show up possibilities or it will back it up, but I'd give it about a 30% weighting.
Yeah, and I think
70% it has to be around, what you can see and observe, and track record and their responses, their behavior in the moment.
I think that's quite important. I think, things like the DISC profile have been given a lot of attention, and I think most of it is just good marketing. I know that there's been comments around the Myers-Briggs one being largely about an unproven theory that's never really been tested, and yet it was popularized by a couple of books and got adopted quite broadly, but there's no real founding or fact on it. And I think also too that one of these profiling things is not the magic bullet to tell you what the issue is. And I think that having an understanding that you should take from multiple perspectives in order to, or multiple evidence points, multiple source reporting, if you like, to understand and get to the crux of the issue. I think a lot of times people are looking for a quick and easy answer.
Oh, look, I totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, the best way forward is not just the profile, certainly. As I said, that's got about a 30% weighting overall. The conversations that you have with the people are the most crucial, and what you actually observe. The actual evidence of what you see them doing or not doing, and how they respond in the conversation. Are they being open? Are they being honest? Are they withholding? What's the body language telling you? And you don't judge the body language. You ask questions stimulated by the body language.
Yeah.
If you get my drift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if they're starting to sweat a little bit more, maybe you're onto something. So
yeah, and there are certain, facial mannerisms and muscle twitches that you shouldn't judge, but it leads you to ask more questions.
Yeah, so I think the term is micro expressions, and they might influence your line of questioning rather than guide it. But
Yes.
So what if left unchecked? How long would it take for an issue to start causing a problematic impact on the business?
That's a difficult question to actually nail down. You can't give that. It depends on the volatility of that person's temperament and the circumstances in which they're operating. Is it a fast-moving process chain, or is it a slow-moving documentary checking process? Depends. The difference between a difficult person, say in a fire station, in the fire brigade, where you've got first responders and it's all action, that has a big impact if there's a difficult person getting in the way of that, versus an insurance claim being processed
Incorrectly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I guess you've got the concept of the insider threat. So having someone with a position of power, access to a lot of information. We mentioned before some military examples. There was a guy in the US was felt a bit downtrodden by his fellow man in his position, and so he stole secrets to get back at people mostly. And very quickly went to did a lot of time in prison, and I'm sure he's still there. But I guess there's impacts and there's impacts. Like, how much of an activist are they? How much are they? There's a term, it's called fatalists, where it's like, if you're a little bit against me, you're totally against me, and so
yeah, absolutely
lash out and react. So yeah, maybe that's where personality traits come in.
Well, the motivation for most people who do the wrong thing deliberately is revenge or profit. And sometimes it's both.
Yeah.
And in fact, in my law enforcement days and the cultivation of informants, they were always motivated by revenge or profit.
Yeah. I guess that's when someone's actively doing something nefarious instead of just turning up late or can't be bothered or it'll do, I'll pass the job along. So I think that there's a distinction potentially between I'll say intentionally doing the wrong thing versus a lack of intention to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a passive and an active.
Yeah, better words than I used. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I mean, most of the time we're dealing with disgruntled, dysfunctional, demoralized people.
Yeah.
Right. And they are the people who they actually make up a too big a part of every workforce.
I think I heard something about 80% of, or 83 or some ridiculous number of percentage of employees are disengaged or are not fully engaged.
Correct. And if you're in the, and some large companies like the BHPs and what have you, and government departments are notorious for a high level of that. I would say that most small businesses that I deal with, it's a different number. It's about 50% from my personal experience. But I don't have, I don't know that you could use that across industry, but I do notice there's a higher level of engagement in smaller businesses. But a lot of that depends on the nature of the leadership. It ultimately boils down to how they're being led.
Yeah. I think, perhaps in large institutions, you've probably got like minimum standards. You fall below and you're out. You sort of drift along in the middle. You're okay. But then, in smaller businesses, it's more about the top line and your capacity, your performance, your desire, your drive. And I think the space between the two is significant. So someone can coast along and just enough not to get fired. And be just as much, and follow all the rules and tick all the boxes and still be a drain on the business.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that boils down to leadership. The leadership. How engaged is the leadership? How aware are they? How much do they care? In the smaller businesses, they've normally got skin in the game.
Yeah.
But in the larger businesses, they don't. It's just other people's money, and so there's a different level of motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some tips for business leaders?
Look, I'll give you an example. I worked with a company just a while ago with their leadership team, their senior leadership team. And there were 8 of them, and I had them in a room, and I said, look, how aligned would you think you are? Mark it out of 10. That everyone in this room, mark it out of 10 and just go around the room and tell me. And they all marked themselves pretty highly, up in the 8s and the 8.5s. I then said, okay, so I've got this little survey I want you to do right now. Do it on your mobile phone. And I gave them the link, and they did this survey, and I asked them 10 questions. And I said, now I'm going to anonymize your answers. And I spat out the results and gave them the results, and they were horrified. No one agreed on the level of trust within the group. No one agreed on what the vision was.
Yeah.
Most of them did not know the values other than the obvious ones.
Yeah.
And they had no idea of the numbers that they had to achieve over the next 90 days. So it showed the business leader and the leadership themselves that they assume they're aligned.
Yeah.
They make the assumption they're aligned because, after all, when they have the meetings go well.
Yes. Yeah.
And people say yes a lot.
Yeah.
But then they go back into their silo. So my tip for the leader is to go deep and double check how aligned your leadership actually really is. And then when you discover, to your shock maybe, that you're not nowhere near as aligned as you thought you were, just imagine what that does to the business, with people pulling in different teams, whole teams pulling in different directions. The waste of resources, the waste of time, and the waste of money. And so they need to have a look at that. So the tip there, number one tip, is, first of all, ask yourself, how deeply aligned is your leadership team? Find out. And then if you know that it needs work, do not try and do it yourselves, because that won't work. You need an external facilitator.
There's too much bias.
Yes, absolutely. Too much bias, too much vested interest, and not enough objectivity. So that on the one hand, and on the other hand, have a look at your statistics in terms of absenteeism. How many people are on sick leave? How many people don't want to do extra work or extra time? And what's your employee turnover rates?
Yeah.
If they're over 10%, you're in trouble. You got a problem.
Yeah.
And the biggest tip, and this is going to be the hardest one for them to do, look in the mirror. Have a good look in the mirror. Have a look at yourself, leader, and ask yourself, to what extent am I part of the problem?
In the words of the late, great Michael Jackson, take a look at yourself and make a change.
Correct. Yes, indeed.
So what do business owners really understand the impacts? Like what's the worst case that could happen out of all of these problems?
Business goes under.
Obviously, yeah, that's very much a worst case, but
I mean, it really is. And
yeah,
often it's that, look, they don't, it'll show up in their inability to keep clients, inability to make sales.
yeah,
So in other words, the money's not coming in anymore and the costs are too high.
yeah,
And so you really are getting into trouble. So that's what will happen if you don't attend to the core issues around difficult people and misaligned leadership. That just spoils the whole culture of the business. And yet it is the quickest thing you can do and the cheapest thing you can do is to have a 90-day program that eradicates those problems. Some of those problems, some people might need to go,
yes,
and be replaced.
yeah,
But most of them can be turned around.
yes, yeah. I think there's a lot of contentious things around like employee awards and redundancies and how hard it is to fire someone. Does that play into it at all?
It does. Look at, yeah, in small industry, in small business, there's more opportunity to replace people. The laws not as it's fairly balanced, I think. When you start talking about larger organizations, that there are political issues there.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about government, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, I've recently worked in a government department where this person was passive aggressive, and he was a giant. He was 6'9",
Yeah.
massive guy, and for 20 years he'd been a behavioural problem in his department, and no one had done anything about it.
Wow.
And then he was then given a new boss, and the new boss was a young professional female who said, "I'm not tolerating this anymore," and then took action. And one of those was to bring me in. But before that, she had gone to HR and said, I've got this problem, and my research shows that he's been the problem for at least 20 years and no one's done anything about it. Why can't we move him on? I mean, he's breached values, he's fireable offences.
Yeah.
And HR said, no, we don't do that around here. You have to work out how to work with him.
Yeah. And we wonder where our taxes are going.
Oh, we know where they're going.
Yeah.
We know where they're going.
Yeah.
It is a disheartening state of affairs.
Yes.
But small business doesn't have the same issue. But they do often not know how to broach the subject. Yeah. How do I deal with this person? This person loses his temper too quickly. I don't want to make it worse. Even though he's difficult, he's actually does good work. And I think when he's on, he's good.
I think it's easier for someone third party to come out and lay the chips on the table without and can be they can be frustrated at you. They can hate you for it or whatever, because you're going to go, and then the relationships between the people directly can still be protected. There's no like personal animosity to say, you said this about me and I didn't like it.
Correct. And we also know, I do empower the business owner and the leader to have those conversations, because the real skill set here is how do we effectively deal with unacceptable behavior and performance and keep trust and respect with those people. Yeah. And that's a skill set. That's a conversational skill set. Yeah. Which is I'm really wanting to, that's my mission, to impart that to business owners and leaders, so that they can do that. Yeah. So basically a toolbox of things that they can use. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because
Well,
not only do they not want to lose respect with those people, but all the people in the rest of the business are looking on. You know, it's hard to keep a secret in a small business.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You walk out the door and it's done. And then there's things like Teams and chat messages and all these things going on in the background that you'll never see. So, but
Absolutely.
other than that, I think you've given some really powerful things for business owners and leaders to use and to think about here today. So I thank you very much for coming on the episode and telling us about how to deal with those difficult issues and deal with those difficult people. If you're listening and you'd like to learn more about David at Meditude, you can go to meditude.com. And you'll find out more about David on his LinkedIn profile, and I'll add both those links in the comments on the podcast post. And if you're listening, thank you for listening today. And if you've got any questions or you'd like to be on the show, you can go to relevate.com.au and fill out a contact form. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time today, David. It was great.
Thanks, Evan. I really appreciated it. It's really been great to be here.
No worries. Thank you all and take care. You can learn more about implementing scalable systems in your business with our book, The Business Octopus, where you can learn how to give your business a brain and teach it to grow itself. You can get your copy from relevate.com.au/octopus. You can also find answers and ask questions in our online community at support.relevate.com.au.